to vote for this yourself, Senator? You had your doubts and reservations, but as it stands now,
no, I will not be.
You will not be.
I will not be voting for it.
So you do understand the frustration that is coming from the Kevin McCarthys and some of these others in the House who say, this is not what we do. We're going to get
Biden and Zelensky will be out in just a moment.
A measure to carry us through a CR, if you will, until we take over. That is, Republicans take over in the House, and we could start from scratch. What do you think of that?
That's a sentiment I share with Kevin McCarthy. I think that we should have given Republicans a chance with the shorter-term vehicle to move it into early next year. That would give us a chance and, frankly, more leverage. You know, I'm a business person, Neil. I don't like to give up leverage unless it's necessary. But here we have a situation where it's going to be done. It's been done in a way that hasn't involved what they call regular process here. We haven't properly vetted it. We just had a bill that exceeds 4,000 pages dropped on our doorstep yesterday morning. We're still working our way through it, and we're going to vote tonight.
Senator, if you indulge me, a quasi alert for those watching at home. We might notice and show guys that the Dow Jones Industrials up 526 points today. We were up yesterday, Senators, you're aware. Apparently, a lot of this is built on the notion that we might skirt, given the fact that some companies had strong numbers. Nike came out with that. We saw the same out of FedEx, that it might still be rocky next year, but not as rocky as we feared. So recession fears eased a little bit. As you know, Senator is a pretty good businessman in your own right. These things are fleeting and go day by day. The market is probably more manic than decisive. But what do you think of that? And do you think that the Federal Reserve will find a proper balance here?
As you know, I'm a member of the Senate Banking Committee as well, so I have jurisdiction and oversight for the Federal Reserve. I watch this very, very closely. I think that Jay Powell and his team at the Fed have a very difficult rope to walk. And I think all this fiscal spending that we're doing here with the Democratic executive branch right now and a Democrat-controlled Senate and House has created a tremendous amount of inflation. Also, energy policies by the Biden administration have done everything to drive energy prices up. As you know, energy is an input factor for most things we manufacture, and certainly every good that has to be transported. All of this has been inherently inflationary. So I think the Fed has a very difficult job. They're moving, I know, carefully but hawkishly to try to bring inflation under control. It's not going to be easy at all, particularly when you've got an executive branch that's pushing hard every day to spend more money.
Senator, thank you for taking the time and the patience.
Well, I wasn't expecting to get Federal Reserve commentary in the lead up here to the Biden-Zelensky joint press conference.
Again, we are waiting momentarily for the President of the United States, the President of Ukraine, but I do want to go to Chad Pergram on Capitol Hill. Something Senator Haggerty mentioned, that he is convinced, at least confident.
Well, I guess while we wait for the Biden-Zelensky meeting to start, we can just remember that the omnibus bill has been presented, and it looks like nearly another $50 billion are planned to go to Zelensky and the Ukrainian administration, of course. Now, some folks are suggesting Zelensky has hinted or will hint that this is not enough, that more is needed. This is actually, interestingly, more than what Joe Biden was planning on providing. Joe Biden was requesting about $37 billion for Ukraine, and the current spending bill includes about 45, which is a good $8 billion more. So we'll see what we get here in these public statements from both Biden and Zelensky. So I expect this will begin any minute, although usually these presidential events are always a few minutes late. It was scheduled to begin about 3-4 minutes ago, but I'm sure it'll begin shortly.
On members, with just a couple of days to review it. And then if they pass it in the wee hours of Thursday morning, that's another optics problem. But they do this all the time this time of year. The House of Representatives would then meet sometime on Thursday to pass the bill before the deadline, which is actually Christmas Eve. So they need to get this under the wire. Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader, said yesterday that, yes, this bill was just, kind of coalesced together in the past couple of days. But most senators should be familiar with each of those provisions that are in the bill. They said they've talked about these things for months. But there are always things that we find out. I've covered the Hill for a long time, that we find out days and even weeks later that there was some little nugget or some consequence, sometimes intended, sometimes not, that's buried in the bill. And I bet come January, there's something that we turn up in this bill that we didn't know about, Neil.
We are waiting to hear from the president, the Ukrainian president here. Do we know what President Zelensky plans to say tonight?
I've been told that this should mirror a lot of what he had to say when he spoke to a virtual joint meeting of Congress in March. He had not left Ukraine since the start of the war. He was in Munich a couple of days before the war started. And remember, he kind of beamed in here. It was a remarkable scene. And it was very similar. A lot of members of Congress talked about Winston Churchill speaking to a joint meeting of Congress in late December, the day after Christmas in 1941. Very similar in that sense. But he's probably going to say, that we need this aid. We need America to stand by us. You've heard people like Mitch McConnell indicate that if the United States does not help, this is going to be a problem down the road for the U.S. because you have Taiwan and China watching. They might see how the United States and the rest of the Western world and NATO and Europe respond. Lindsey Graham, the Republican senator from South Carolina, indicated that this is a U.S. problem if we don't put out the fire right now. Now, nobody quite knows what that off-ramp is, and Lindsey Graham said as much the other day. This is going to be very different, and this is kind of a pressure point, an inflection point here by Nancy Pelosi, kind of putting the cherry on the top of the sundae of her speakership, saying this is what we need to do to fight for democracy and fight for the United States and fight for Western values. This is something that we've seen from Nancy Pelosi before, just not inviting Vladimir Zelensky to speak to this joint meeting.
Yeah, we'll just jump in here and just also mention that the Economist actually awarded their Country of the Year award to Ukraine. Ukraine obviously has created a lot of press over this last year. It's been dominant in markets. It's been dominant in humanity. Pretty intense. So I'm very curious to see what kind of talk we get here between the two. And really, I think something that maybe we ought to look for or hope for is any potential indicator that, and I doubt we'll get it, right? And that's potentially negative. But I think there'll be some hope that there could be some talk about maybe a path to an end, right? But, I'll say sometimes there's this belief, which could be true, that why would Zelensky even remotely suggest a path to an end as long as there continues to be funding? Or if there's the hope of more funding. So in an interesting way, some folks have theorized that potentially, the war in Ukraine could reach more of a settlement when that funding stops. And it's believed that next year, when we have a Congress that's probably in a little bit more of gridlock, it's unlikely that there'll be a lot more funding for Ukraine. And some believe that, Russia might be thinking, okay, we just have to wait for that American funding to run out. Some are saying Ukrainians will be more inclined to negotiate when that funding runs out. But right now, it seems like rather than that funding running out, it's being topped off, right? And it's a message that Democrats and certainly many globalists will agree is one to defend democracy and expand sort of Western ideals. Whereas, others and people on the other side will say, no, this is just prolonging needlessly a war. The more money that's provided to Ukraine is the more people that die, basically. And the more people that die ultimately is worse than who controls a certain strip of land. That lives are more important than land. And the more money that's provided for weapons, the worst. We have some of our first Patriot missiles going to Ukraine ever from the United States. These are some of the surface-to-air missile units that we in America use to defend our land, and these are very, very powerful. And the hope is that they will be used by Ukraine to defend their utility infrastructure, to prevent continued strikes by Russia, to throw the country into blackouts and continue to cause freezing and devastation, especially during the winter time. So it's interesting. You've got a lot of arguments on both sides. And I'm very curious here to see Biden and Zelensky together, how it'll go. So we'll see.
want to keep Ukraine safe and you want to, prevent Vladimir Putin from making any advance, you got to vote for this thing. I don't know whether that's moving minds here or any Republicans, certainly, but your thoughts?
I doubt it's moving any skeptics' minds. We're going to hear a lot of, I think, Churchillian rhetoric tonight, both from President Zelensky and from U.S. leaders. What we're not likely to hear is a plan to end the war. And I know there are some people who do want to just push the Russians all the way back to their pre-2012 borders, kick them out of Crimea. That seems outlandish to me, or unlikely to me. That would require an amphibious or an airborne assault that is successful against Crimea, kicking Russia out of long-held territory. There's another angle here. I actually think McCarthy in his heart of hearts, and I can't read his mind, but probably is very desperate for this to pass, because the last thing he wants to deal with as speaker early in his tenure is having to cough up more aid for Ukraine and having to deal with a very narrow majority and a number of people who are frankly willing to bail on him from his own party.
All right, some of the key players are suddenly in their seats here, so it's only moments away from hearing from the two presidents. What do you think we will hear from them?
Yeah, I think, again, you'll hear somewhat of a victory lap, premature, I think, for President Biden. You'll hear, a talk of solidarity, of moving together, and Zelensky asking for more aid, not just for the military, but maybe even trying to preview some rebuilding aid. And what you're not going to hear is, frankly, a plan to get out of this and to prevent a frozen conflict from transpiring. It's very possible that we are here at this point next year, next Christmas, and this conflict still goes on. Vladimir Putin actually has an incentive to push the Europeans to next winter, which will be even tougher for them economically and from an energy point of view. And also, Biden has to deal with a divided Congress from this point. This may be the high water mark for Zelensky. He really ought to be negotiating with the Russians right now, in my assessment, because I think his leverage could decrease from this point. Russians know our politics just as well as other people.
All right. You've been seeing the Defense and State Department secretaries enter, well as that.
Yeah, that's actually exactly what I was, right before the speaker just spoke, I was suggesting, look, the funding's going to run out. And next year, there ain't going to be a top off. So, it's an interesting argument to maybe get done what you can get done now, so to speak, while you actually have leverage before that leverage goes away. That, I think, is an interesting expansion of that argument.
The Democrats and frankly to a large number of Republicans, there's not a lot of difference in that foreign policy is a success. It's one they want to tout. It's one they think it works for the president. So this is even a bit of a campaign move here, something they think they're putting their best foot forward. I did look back at previous times foreign leaders like this have visited. It's not necessarily a great role of honor. The South Vietnamese president came in the late 50s. Hamid Karzai, the Afghan president, and Iraq's president, Prime Minister, came in 2006. Of course, we've had some leaders come and give joint addresses to a joint session of Congress who have actually sustained power, but it's often not a harbinger of great things to come.
All right. We were in the middle of a 2-minute warning, I think down to a minute. I do want to emphasize the unique moment we're in where President Zelensky, who throughout the war has stayed and decided never to ever leave or go outside the boundaries of Ukraine, has done so today for this moment. Your thoughts? Yeah,
it's a great way to really stick it to Vladimir Putin, which I think is part of this, to demonstrate support, to demonstrate his power to his own people. He's been in a strong position domestically, and I think people will forgive him for slipping out to go and frankly meet with his greatest benefactor. As you pointed out earlier, the United States funds about 3/4 of what is being spent in Ukraine. So, if you look back as well, look at the meetings between Churchill and Stalin and Roosevelt. This is something that is done that's important. It's important symbolically and to coordinate policy.
Likely the president will emphasize, as he and many of his cabinet officials have said, we're here as long as it takes. I asked this of other guests. I'll ask you, Kristen, how long is as long as it takes?
Well, shorter than you think. The American people are fickle. We talk about deterrence against China. The way you deter China is to deter China. Our military has been shrinking in the Pacific. I'd argue that we're neglecting it, and that the Chinese might actually enjoy the fact that we're spending a lot of resources in Ukraine. It's hard to tell, but we are not good long-term players. The three leaders I mentioned earlier who've given joint addresses passed into history. Right. One was assassinated with the possible knowledge of the
All right,
U.S.
Christian,
government.
thank you very, very much. The presidents of the United States and Ukraine.
President Zelensky, I'm honored to welcome you back to the White House. We spent an awful lot of time on the telephone as well as on video, but it's good to see you in person again. And we've been in close and frequent communication throughout this conflict from the very beginning, but particularly, it's particularly meaningful to talk with one another in person, look each other in the eye, because leadership through this terrible crisis has inspired the Ukrainian people, as you have done, Mr. President, and the American people and the entire world. This visit to Washington, your first trip outside Ukraine since February, comes as President Putin is escalating his attacks, his brutal attacks, targeting critical infrastructure to make life as hard as possible for not only innocent Ukrainians, but children and young children, and everything from orphanages to schools. It's just outrageous what he's doing. And we've, as we've heard as we head into the new year, it's important for the American people and for the world to hear directly from you, Mr. President, about Ukraine's fight and the need to continue to stand together through 2023. This visit also falls on the 300-day mark of Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine. 300 days since Putin launched an unprovoked, unjustified, all-out assault on the free people of Ukraine. 300 days of Ukrainian people showing Russia and the world their steel backbone, their love of country, and their unbreakable determination, and I emphasize unbreakable determination, to choose their own path. To Ukrainian people, I say to them all, you have demonstrated, you have shown your strong stand against aggression in the face of the imperial appetites of autocrats who wrongfully believe they might be able to make might right, and they're not able to do it. Thus far, they've stood alone, and you haven't stood alone. You have had significant help. We've never stand alone. You will never stand alone. When Ukraine's freedom was threatened, the American people, like generations of Americans before us, did not hesitate. The support from all across this country, Americans of every walk of life, Democrats and Republicans alike, had the resources and to rebound and resounding united way to provide unequivocal and unbending support for Ukraine. Because we understand in our bones that Ukraine's fight is part of something much bigger. The American people know that if we stand by in the face of such blatant attacks on liberty and democracy and the core principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity, the world would surely face worse consequences. And as I said, when Putin rolled his tanks into Ukraine in February, American people are prepared to have us stand up to bullies, stand up for freedom. That's who we are as Americans. And that's exactly what we've done. Even before the invasion began and Putin threatened Ukraine by building up his forces, we helped make sure Ukraine would be prepared to defend itself, even before they crossed into Ukraine. We provided a steady stream of defensive weapons, including air defense systems and artillery, ammunition, and so much more. And we've not done it alone. From the very beginning, the United States rallied allies and partners from around the world to stand strong with Ukraine and impose unprecedented, and I emphasize unprecedented, sanctions and export controls on Russia, making it harder for the Kremlin to wage this brutal war. More than 50 nations have committed nearly 2,000 tanks and other armored vehicles, more than 800 artillery systems, more than 2 million rounds of artillery ammunition, and more than 50 advanced multiple rocket launching systems, anti-ship and air defense systems, all to strengthen Ukraine. Together, we provided billions of dollars in direct budgetary support to make sure the Ukrainian government can keep providing basic fundamental services to the Iranian people, like healthcare, education, and emergency personnel. This includes another $2 billion that in direct budget support from the American people that the World Bank distributed earlier this week. We provided humanitarian assistance to help the millions of Ukrainians who have been forced to flee their homes because of Putin's inhumane, brutal war. Communities across Europe have opened their hearts and their homes to help Ukrainians in need. The United States has been proud to welcome more than 221,000 Ukrainians seeking refuge since March of 2022, including as part of Uniting for Ukraine, as part of our Uniting for Ukraine program. And today, USAID is committing more than $374 million in urgently needed humanitarian assistance for Ukraine. This will help provide food and cash assistance for more than 1.5 million Ukrainian people, as well as access to health care, safe drinking water, and help stay warm in the winter for more than 2.5 million Ukrainians. The United States and our allies and partners around the world have delivered a broad range of assistance at historic speed, and has been critical to bolstering Ukraine's success thus far. Ukraine has won the Battle of Kyiv, has won the Battle of Kherson, has won the Battle of Kharkiv. Ukraine has defied Russia's expectations at every single turn. And President Zelensky, you have made it clear that he is open to pursuing, well, let me put it this way. He's not open, but you're open to pursuing peace. You're open to pursuing a just peace. We also know that Putin has no intention of stopping this cruel war. And the United States is committed to ensuring that the brave Ukrainian people can continue to defend their country against Russian aggressions as long as it takes. And I want to thank the members of Congress for their broad bipartisan support to Ukraine. And I look forward to signing the omnibus bill soon, which includes $45 billion in additional funding for Ukraine. I'll also sign into law the National Defense Authorization Act, which includes authorities to make it easier for the Department of Defense to procure critical munitions and defense materials for Ukraine and other key materials to strengthen our national security. Today, I'm announcing the next tranche of our security assistance to Ukraine. $1.85 billion package of security assistance that includes both direct transfers of equipment that Ukraine needs, as well as contracts to supply ammunition Ukraine will need in the months ahead for its artillery, its tanks, and its rocket launchers. Critically, in addition to these new capabilities, like precision aerial munitions, the package will include a Patriot missile battery, which will train Ukrainian forces to operate as part of the ongoing effort to help bolster Ukraine's air defense. It's going to take some time to complete the necessary training, but the Patriot battery will be another critical asset for Ukraine as it defends itself against Russian aggression. Altogether, today's new security assistance with humanitarian funding amounts to $2.2 billion in additional support for the Ukrainian people. We should be clear about what Russia's doing. It is purposefully attacking Ukraine's critical infrastructure, destroying the systems to provide heat and light to the Ukrainian people during the coldest, darkest part of the year. Russia is using winter as a weapon, freezing people, starving people, cutting them off from one another. It's the latest example of the outrageous atrocities the Russian forces are committing against innocent Ukrainian civilians, children, and their families. And the United States is working together with our allies and partners to provide critical equipment to help Ukraine make emergency repairs to their power transmission systems and strengthen the stability of Ukraine's grid in the face of Russia's targeted attacks. We're also working to hold Russia accountable, including efforts in Congress that will make it easier to seek justice for Russia's war crimes in Ukraine. Let me close with this. Tonight is the fourth night of Hanukkah, a time when Jewish people around the world, President Zelensky and many of the families among them, honor the timeless miracle of a small band of warriors fighting for their values and their freedom against a much larger foe, and how they endured and how they overcame. How the flame of faith, with only enough oil for one day, burned brightly for 8 days. A story of survival and resilience that reminds us that the coldest days of the year, that light will always prevail over darkness, and hope drives away despair. And that the human spirit is unconquerable as long as there are good people willing to do what is right. This year has brought so much needless suffering and loss to the Ukrainian people. But I want you to know, President Zelensky, I want you to know that all the people of Ukraine to know as well. The American people have been with you every step of the way, and we will stay with you. We will stay with you for as long as it takes. What you're doing, what you've achieved, it matters not just to Ukraine, but to the entire world. And together, I have no doubt we'll keep the flame of liberty burning bright, and the light will remain and prevail over the darkness. Thank you for being here, Mr. President. We're going to stand with you.
Thank you. Шановний пане президент,
Dear Mr. President, please put on the equipment. Once again, Mr. President, President Biden, audience, journalists, ladies and gentlemen, I came here to the United States to forward the word of thanks to the people of America, people who do so much for Ukraine. I am thankful for all of this. This visit to the United States became really a historic one for our relations with the United States and the American leadership. In the last 30 days of this war, we have started a new phase of our interrelations with the United States. We became a real partners and allies with the content. And I felt today during all of my meetings and during our talks. Once again, I would like to thank Mr. President Biden, for his candid support and what is very important, the understanding of Ukraine, and for the support of the international coalition to strengthen international law. I am grateful to President Biden for his personal efforts, his steps that unite the partners and global South. When all countries of the world take some position and are focusing on cooperation and mutual understanding, this is very useful for all of the countries, for Ukraine, for the United States. I want to thank the Congress for bipartisan, bicameral support, and I am looking forward to good meetings with the members of the Congress and their support. This is the visit that I'm here today to meet with the Congress. The main issue during my today's talks is to strengthen Ukraine. Next year, our movement forward to fight for our freedom and independence. I have good news returning home. President Biden announced a new package of defense support, about $2 billion, and the strongest element of this package is the Patriots battery systems, something that will strengthen our air defense significantly. This is a very important step to create a secure airspace for Ukraine, and that's the only way we would be able to deprive the terrorist country and their terror attack to strike our energy sector, our people, and our infrastructure. We had a very good negotiation and talks about our strategic steps, which we discussed with President Biden, and what we expect next year and for what we are preparing. This is very important for all Ukrainians, and I am hopeful. And once again, thank you, Mr. President, for 45 billion, because this is a big assistance, and I hope that the Congress will approve this financial assistance for our country. This is almost 45 billion. thank you very much for the support. Every dollar of this investment for the United States is going to be strengthening of global security. I know that the American leadership will be strong and will play important role in global scope. And the United States will help us to defend our values and independence. And regardless of changes in the Congress, I believe that there will be bipartisan and bicameral support. And I know that everybody works for this. And of course, during all of my meetings today, we discussed issues of standoff against terror of Russia, the destruction of our energy infrastructure. We need to survive this winter. We need to protect our people, and we need to be very specific in this area. This is a key humanitarian issue for us right now. This is the survival issue. We are discussing sanctions and legal pressure on the terrorist country Russia. Russia needs to be held accountable for everything it does against us, against our people, against Europe and the whole free world. And it is very important that we have the peace formula, and for that we offer very specific steps what America can do to help us to implement them. We propose global formula for peace summit. I'm thankful for our American counterparts that they feel us and understand how important it is to continue and stay on course and work on integrity of the country and international rule of law. We will also need, as soon as our defense capabilities will be strengthened in the next few months. I don't want to discuss it in details right now. I believe you understand why, but I am very grateful to President Biden. Thank you for your attention to all of these issues. Glory to Ukraine.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. We're going to take questions from 4 different reporters, and let's start with Alex of Yahoo News.
That's it.
Thank you, Mr. President. In 2022, you presided over a bipartisan international coalition to support Ukraine. How will you keep that coalition from fraying in 2023? And President Zelensky, welcome to Washington on this beautiful winter day. What is your message to the American people?
Well, answering your questions first, I'm not at all worried about holding the alliance.
Наше союзницьке партнерство з країнами Європейського Союзу і іншими країнами.
I assume this is simultaneous. All right. Okay. I've never seen NATO or the EU more united about anything at all. And I see no sign of there being any change. We all know what's at stake here. Our European partners, all the more so. They fully understand it. This is about, we've never seen a major invasion of a European country since World War II. And they see no signs that Putin is going to do anything to change that unless we resist and we help the Ukrainians resist. We all know what's at stake, the very idea of sovereignty, the UN Charter. Putin thought he would weaken NATO. Instead, he strengthened NATO. I once said to him that we talk about he wanted to see the, Europe end up being divided. And instead, what did he do? He produced a more united Europe with Sweden and Finland joining. So I don't see any reason to believe there'll be any lessening of support. And as we reach out to our NATO allies, our Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of State, we get continued support, not only there, but also from around the world, from Japan and many other countries as well. So I feel very good about the solidarity of support for Ukraine.
Thank you for your question. Thank you very much. You asked me what is the message to American people. I think I will tell you very simple things, which are very important for me. And I think so that we have the same values and the same understanding of the life, the sense of the life. My message, I wish you peace. I think that is the main thing, and you understand it only when the war in your country, when somebody like these terrorists from Russia come to your houses. And I wish you to see your children alive and adult. And I wish you to see your children when they will go to universities and to see their children. I think that is the main thing, what I can wish you. And of course, to be together with us, jointly, because we really fight for our common victory against this tyranny. That is real life, and we will win. And I really want win together. Thanks so much. Not want, sorry, I'm sure.
You call on one of your people, press person?
Yeah.
I actually like that, him speaking in English. I thought that was pretty powerful. That was a good move. And it felt sincere. It was good.
Ukrainian television. President Zelensky, President Biden, I got a question to both of you. But firstly, as Ukrainian, and I mean it, I want to thank the United States for supporting my country. And, my family is in Ukraine, and I definitely understand they will not be alive today if America will not support my country, both politically and militarily. So thank you for this. It's honest.
Will.
And as of my question, we enter a new phase of this war, and you definitely discussed today which path to choose, how the war could come to an end, and what's next. Will it turn into a new counteroffensive or some kind of peace talks? So, Mr. Biden, Mr. Zelensky, could you share your vision? What's the fair way to end this war, and how do you understand this word's fair peace? Thank you.
My view.
Your guy.
I think we have. I see.
Although I like him very much already.
Ви розпочали це запитання. I'm sorry. Sometimes I switch on my native language. Ви почали з того, що ви сказали, що ваша сім'я в Україні.
Stating that your family is in Kyiv and without the assistance of the United States. This is absolutely true. The U.S. leadership in this assistance is strong, and again, I would like to remind you that U.S. family will be in danger without the armed forces of Ukraine, which is very important. That concerns your questions per se. What would you like to hear? Just peace? I don't know. I don't know what just peace is. It's a very philosophical description. If there is a just war, I don't know. For all of us, peace, just peace is different. For me, as a president, just peace is no compromises as to the sovereignty, freedom, and territorial integrity of my country, the payback for all the damages inflicted by Russian aggression. I'm sorry, I'm talking about children a lot today, but as a father, I would like to emphasize, how many parents lost their sons and daughters on the front lines. So what is just peace for them? Money is nothing, and no compensations or reparations are of no consequence. They live by revenge. I think this is a tremendous tragedy, and the longer the war lasts, the longer this aggression lasts, there will be more parents who live for the sake of vengeance. or revenge. And I know a lot of people like that. So there can't be any just peace in the war that was imposed on us by these, I don't know how to describe that because we are in the White House and I can't find the proper language. So these inhumans, I would say.
Let me respond. I think we share the exact same vision, and that a free, independent, prosperous, and secure Ukraine is the vision. We both want this war to end. We both want it to end. And as I've said, it could end today if Putin had any dignity at all and did the right thing and just said, pulled out. But that's not going to happen. Not going to happen. It's not going to happen now. So what comes next? We talked about today was we're going to continue to help Ukraine succeed on the battlefield. It can succeed in the battlefield with our help and the help of our European allies and others. So that if and when President Zelensky is ready to talk with the Russians, he will be able to succeed as well because he will have won on the battlefield. And, you know, I don't think we should underestimate the impact this war is having on Russia and the losses they're suffering. And you saw just, I think it was 2 days ago, Putin saying that this is much tougher than he thought. He thought he could break NATO. He thought he could break the West. He thought he could break the alliance. He thought he could be welcomed by the Ukrainian people that were Russian speaking. He was wrong, wrong, and wrong. He continues to be wrong. The sooner he makes it's clear that he cannot possibly win this war, that's when the time we have to put this president in a position to be able to decide how he wants the war to end. My turn, huh?
Please, yeah.
Phil Matherly, Matt Matherly of CNN.
Thank you, Mr. President. Welcome, Mr. President. Mr. President, to start with you, your advisors often talk about how critically important you view face-to-face interaction. I'm wondering, after spending 2+ hours face-to-face with President Zelensky, what you learned or what you took from the meeting that perhaps you couldn't glean or learn in the phone calls or video conferences, and somewhat tied to that, was there any discussion related to the U.S. assessment that Russia would not take escalatory action now that Patriots are being sent, a Patriot battery will be delivered?
Let me answer the first question, the first part of your question. You know, I get kidded for saying that there's all politics is personal. It's all about looking someone in the eye, and I mean it sincerely. I don't think there's any substitute for sitting down face to face with a friend or a foe and looking them in the eye. And that's exactly what's happening at this moment. We've done that more than once, and we're going to continue to do it. And the winter is setting in, and Putin is increasingly going after civilian targets and women and children, orphanages. This guy is, well, but he's going to fail. And he's going to fail. He's already failed because he now knows that there's no way he's ever going to occupy all of Ukraine. There's no way in which he's going to be accepted by the Ukrainian people. And so he's failed in the past, and it was very important for him and everyone else to see that President Zelensky and I are united, two countries together, to make sure he cannot succeed. And I think I may be mistaken, but I know I judge every leader by the way what they say to me, their consistency, and look at me in the eye. This guy has to his very soul is who he says he is. It's clear who he is. He's willing to give his life for his country, and all the folks that came with him today. And so I think it's important for him to know we are going to do everything in our power to see that he succeeds.
Thanks.
What was the second part of your question?
I just asked if you had discussed how the U.S. calculated the escalatory effect of sending a Patriot missile battery to Ukraine.
I did not discuss that at all with the president, but we do not. It's a defensive system. It's a defensive weapon system. It's not escalatory. It's defensive, and it's easy to not. And we'd love to not have to have them use it. Just stop the attacks.
President Zelensky, again, welcome. You mentioned earlier that you wanted to make this trip for a while now. Why now? And also, can you tell me what you think the message you are sending to President Putin is, given the fact that 24 hours ago you were on the ground in the front lines with artillery echoing behind you, and now you find yourself in the White House standing next to the president?
Дуже дякую вам за запитання.
For your question,
Що стосується,
as to
який меседж послати
what
Путіну.
is the message for Putin.
Я стою сьогодні
I am standing here in the United States with President Biden on the same podium
Я його поважаю.
because I respect him
Як людину, як
as a
президента,
a
як
person,
чоловіка за його
as a president, as a human being for his position. And for me, this is a historic moment. I can send messages to President Biden. For example, if it's not serious, you said, what's going to happen after Patriots are installed? After that, we will send another signal to President Biden that we would like to get more Patriots.
Yeah.
We're working.
That is a lie. We are in war. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. That is my appreciation. Що стосується
As
президента
to
Путіна,
President Putin,
в 2019
in 2019,
у нас була
we had a Normandy meeting. In 2019, I became the president of Ukraine, and at that time, we were sending maximum messages to President Putin, telling him that there shouldn't be a full-scale invasion, to stop aggression, to renew our territorial integrity, to find diplomatic solution. Or, God forbid, we should not have a full-scale war. At that time, he said it won't happen. He was lying. So what kind of message I can send him after he actually destroyed our life, is destroying our life? He can even go further, somewhere where the Soviet Union stayed before this. So he might want to invade those territories too. I believe that there is something mortal about his inadequate approach to the world. Why we need to send him a message? He needs to be interested in getting attention from the world, because he is not a subject of civilized people. He should be interested in trying to save something of his culture and history of his country. So that's his problem now.
This will be the last question.
Olga Koshelenko, 1+1 TV channel. When the full-scale invasion started, U.S. officials said that Ukraine cannot receive Patriots because, as you said, it might be unnecessary escalation. And now it is happening. Right now, today, it is happening. And now Ukraine desperately needs more capabilities, including long-range missiles, ATACMS. Maybe I sound naive, but can we make a long story short and give Ukraine all capabilities it needs and liberate all territories rather sooner than later?
Okay, that's asking for World War III.
His answer is yes.
Yeah.
I agree.
Let me be straightforward with you here. Look, the fact is that it's important to remember that before Russia invaded, we had dedicated an enormous amount of security assistance to Ukraine. And we've given Ukraine what they needed when they needed to defend themselves. And since the invasion, that has resulted in more than $20 billion in terms of security assistance. Just today, I approved another $1.8 billion in additional assistance to Ukraine for it to succeed on the battlefield. And we're focused on working with allies and partners to generate capability in 4 key areas. Air defense, as we know today, the Patriot is the best of that. Secondly is to, and we're looking to do more. We provided hundreds of advanced artillery systems and from dozens of countries. Thirdly, we've worked with partners to get Ukraine tanks and other armored vehicles. And fourthly, we've announced today another 200,000 rounds of additional ammunition. Now you say, why don't we just give Ukraine everything there is to give? Well, for two reasons. One, there's an entire alliance that is critical to stay with Ukraine. And the idea that we would give Ukraine material that is fundamentally different than is already going there would have a prospect of breaking up NATO and breaking up the European Union and the rest of the world. We're going to give Ukraine what it needs to be able to defend itself, to be able to succeed and succeed in the battlefield. And the other piece of this is, you may recall, one of the reasons why I have spent, well, I won't tell you the calculation, but I've spent several hundred hours face to face with our European allies and the heads of state of those countries, and making the case as to why it was overwhelming in their interest that they continue to support Ukraine. They understand it fully, but they're not looking to go to war with Russia. They're not looking for a third world war. And I think it can all be avoided by making sure that Ukraine is able to succeed in the battlefield. So anyway, there's more to say, but I probably already said too much. Thank you. Well, thank you all very, very much. Appreciate your time and attention. And as I said, Mr. President, you don't have to worry. We are staying with Ukraine as long as Ukraine is there. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
All right, we'll do a little summary here just to catch you up on all the goodies here of what we heard. So we usually do this at the end of every live stream. In case you're new here, remember the only sponsor for this channel is myself and the programs I'm Building Your Wealth link down below, with beautiful new lectures coming out before the year is over for both stocks and psychology of money and Zero to Millionaire real estate investing. Use that holidays coupon code link down below, by the way. Okay, so what happens here? Well, we had a statement from Biden, Zelensky, and then it's sort of a joint Q&A with 4 prepared questions. The insights we got were really just the following, that Biden has a complete commitment to supporting Ukraine in their defense. And this meeting is coming or culminating at the same time as Russia continues to pound Ukrainian infrastructure, knocking out power infrastructure, water infrastructure, and of course, food supply chains to make this winter exceptionally difficult for individuals. However, the world is united against Russia. Joe Biden authorized an additional $2.2 billion of support above the $45 billion that are in the spending plan from Congress. That is the $1.7 trillion spending plan that I've already broken down on this channel. You can see that. Just type in Meet Kevin's spending plan, $1.7 trillion into YouTube. You'll see it. Talks about this $2.2 billion of additional support, including $1.85 billion in direct transfers of equipment and contracts to supply ammunition like rockets, artillery, and rocket launchers, as well as a tank ammunition. The belief from Zelensky, or the response from Zelensky, excuse me, was that we became partners and allies, and I will have good news coming home. $2 billion more than I came for, plus the $45 billion. And this is a big assistance. And he thanked America and Congress for that, hoped that Congress would vote for it. He did give a sincere sort of break aside when he spoke in English in response to a question, and he said, "I wish you peace. I, essentially would hate to see that if terrorists from Russia came to your house, you wouldn't like it either," is essentially what he was saying. He says that he wishes your children a happy life and that they can live and can become adults, and that you could see their children have children. Or your children have children. So this was him in sort of broken English, appealing in English to Congress and to Americans. I actually thought he did a pretty sincere, good job here. Biden talks about how Finland and Sweden have come closer, and the international community has come closer together in ostracizing Russia. Zelensky talks about focusing on just peace. And then, of course, we get A lot of talk about Patriot missiles, about how these are defensive. Some questions about how aren't these potentially going to be escalatory in the war against Ukraine. And Biden's response here is, of course, no, these are defense surface-to-air missiles. I've covered these on the channel quite a bit. You could search these Meet Kevin Patriot missiles to see a little bit about those. But you'll also see Biden, or rather today, Biden just talked a little bit about how, look, we can't provide every kind of weapon for Ukraine to attack Russia and to turn this into a two-sided, all-out offensive war, because ultimately Biden doesn't want to risk breaking up the NATO alliance, where all of a sudden there's some kind of implication that, oh, well, if the United States is preventing offensive weapons, are they entering the war? And does potentially then a counterattack merit, an Article 5 response by NATO, where an attack on one is an attack on all? So this is sort of like the little dress rehearsal that we went through when missiles accidentally landed in Poland, killing 2 farmers. Which is terrible, as well as all the other loss of life that's been occurring here, where there were serious concerns about were these Russian missiles, what would happen here. That was pretty dramatic and escalatory for a moment, but fortunately, cooler heads prevailed there. It seemed like these were accidentally either discharged or misaimed or malfunctioning Ukrainian missiles, whatever it was. And it's a tragedy of war, which is quite unfortunate. But Biden really ended by saying, look, we're staying here with Ukraine. And Zelensky seemed grateful. Now, I think bottom line here is that Zelensky is now potentially looking at $45 billion plus $2.2 billion in funding to keep fighting Russia. There again is a belief that the more funding Ukraine has, the longer the war goes on, because they can keep going. Of course, the hope is that Ukraine outlasts Russia, which some folks say is very unlikely, as Russia continues to, of course, sell oil to India and China and elsewhere. And of course, they have other sources of income and wealth. So it's going to be interesting. But next year, Congress is likely going to be in gridlock for 2 years until the presidential elections, and we won't actually see a new Congress entirely until not 23, not 24, but 2025. So you really have 2 potential Congresses here, 2 potential national budgets, which include foreign defense spending, for 2 years of potential gridlock after this funding. But hopefully this war is long over before this money expires. And hey, maybe even some of it will go towards either rebuilding Ukraine or come back to America. We'll see. But of course, there's always the counter argument that, hey, these Patriot missiles will be enough to maybe provoke Putin to be even more aggressive. And Putin will take out these Patriot missiles. We'll see. But the war rages on. It's unfortunate. And I think everybody hopes for a negotiated end as soon as possible. Unfortunately, in this press conference today, you did have Biden and Zelensky double down on the idea that peace, essentially an end to the war, is not a negotiated end where there's any kind of giving of land. It is all of Ukraine that's Ukrainian stays Ukrainian. So pretty hard line driven here. Doesn't seem like there's really any give on either side. And we'll see where that takes us. Anyway, there you have it. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.